This is chapter number 2, Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. So we are talking about the socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. We will talk about this socialism in detail. But before that, what is the age of social change? What we have seen in the French Revolution is the idea of freedom and equality. But this revolution actually circulated this idea to the Europe, to the neighboring countries also, and also to the world. And there was a possibility now that the society may be structured according to this. As we have seen that before the 18th century, society was broadly divided into estates, that is, different estates were there, that is aristocracy, church, with controlled economic social power, that is the first estate and second estate. But because of this French Revolution, many things changed. And these ideas of rights, the ideas of freedom, it spread. Even in India, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Desrosiers, they talked about the significance of the French Revolution, especially in terms of what happened post-revolution in Europe. And in the colonies also, in the development in the colonies, it reshaped these ideas of societal change that emanated from the French Revolution. But the thing is, there is always two sides of a coin. Everyone was not keen for this complete transformation, and responses varied. There was a gradual shift. So there were simply different people, and we'll talk about them in groups. That is, some were conservatives, liberals, and radicals. So some were conservatives, some were liberals, and some were radicals. So we'll talk about these three words, very important words, and you need to understand because they are generally asked. So how they differ? We will talk about the important political traditions of the 19th century, and then we will see the Russian Revolution, how socialism, Samajwad, became one of the most significant and powerful ideas to shape the society in the 20th century. So that is why we need to learn the Russian Revolution. As I said, liberals, radicals, and conservatives, these three words are very important. The change in the society, how they have to be bought in. So one of the groups which looked to change society was liberals. So who were liberals? They wanted a nation which tolerate things, tolerate all religions, all different, sections of the society. So in this time, European were actually discriminated. Mostly European countries, they have one religion which is you can say popular or say dominant religion. For example, Britain favored the Church of England, Austria and Spain, they favored the Catholic Church. But these liberals, they opposed the uncontrolled power of dynastic rulers also. They just want that the right of individuals should be addressed or should be safeguarded against the government. They argued that there should be representative of the government has to be representative of the people, and there needs to be a well-trained judiciary who understands the law, and on the basis of this laws, the country or the region should be governed. But they were not Democrats. They did not believe in the universal adult franchise. That is, they don't want the right of vote to everyone, only the people who are wealthy and they can give. They also did not want women to vote. So let me just tell you about these liberals again. So these liberals, first thing is, they want the society to change and all religions should be tolerated. Second, that they were against the dynastic rulers. Okay, then they wanted the citizens to form a government, and they want that there has to be a well-trained judiciary. But they were against the rights of vote to everyone. Women know and others know only the wealthy should vote. So these were the ideas of the liberals. But radicals, this is the second part of thinking. Radicals wanted a nation in which the government was based on the majority of the country's population. For example, if you talk about India, then mostly 80% is Hindu. So radicals, if say radical Indian, they want the Hindu to rule the country. For example, I'm just giving an example. And many supported the suffragette movement. That means they want women also to be a part of mainstream and they must vote. But unlike liberals, they oppose the privileges of great land owners and wealthy factory owners. They were not against the existence of private property, but they don't also want that concentration of property should be in few hands. So these were radicals. So if I can just summarize this, radical, they were interested in majority. The majority should govern, supported suffragette movement of women, and they were not against the private property, but we don't want concentration in few hands. Now let us come to conservatives. Conservatives were opposed to both radicals and liberals. Conservatives also thought, because they don't want, previously they were conservative, they don't want things to change. But after the French Revolution, they also thought that there is need to change. But the idea of change should come gradually, right? So they accepted this change, but it has to be, the change needs to be brought in slow motion or slow process. So conservatives, if I can just summarize them, first is they were now, previously they were not in a mood to change, but after French Revolution they wanted change, but this change should be slow. This is what their idea were. So these were the different ideas. This clashed. There were so much happening, social and political turmoil after French Revolution, and there are certain things which happen, which we are going to see. See, there is a word which has come, suffragette. This suffragette movement, a movement to give women the right to vote. That is what this these were radicals. They were accepting that. They wanted this suffragette movement to be a success. So what was the industrial society and social change? As I said, that the political things were changing, and this were the signs of new time, new change. And social, economically, things were changing. New cities were coming up. Industrialization industrialized regions were developed, and just industrial revolution has taken place. Now industrialization has done what? It has brought all people, men, women, children, to factories. The working hours were long, wages were less, unemployment was common, particularly if there is a low demand of industrial goods. Or for these people, because these people were coming to work, now the housing and sanitation problem was there. Now liberals and radicals, they wanted and they did various things for solving these issues. This is a picture of London poor in the mid 19th century. This was the scene. You can just you can think of that what was happening at that time, and right now what England is. All properties, mostly the industries, were the property of individuals. Mostly liberals and radicals, they were property owners and employers, and they wanted that the economy, if they want to increase this industrialization, then the workforce, basically these people we talked about, should be healthy and the citizens should be well educated. They wanted that the individual effort and the labor and the enterprise should grow. If the freedom of these individuals are ensured, they think that if the poor could labor and those with capital could operate without restraint, they believe that the society will develop. Now, many working men and women who wanted changes in the world rallied around these liberal and radical groups. So some nationalists, liberals and radicals, they wanted revolution to put an end to the kind of government which were established in Europe in 1815. In France, Italy, Germany, Russia, they become revolutionaries. Why? Because they just want to overthrow these monarchs. So nationalists talked of revolution that could create nations where all the citizens, they have equal rights as thought by these three different thoughts or stream of thoughts. After 1815, Giuseppe Mazzini, an Italian nationalist, conspired with others to achieve this in Italy. This is just an example. So, coming of socialism in Europe, because we talked about the backdrop now, what was happening there, and the most far-reaching vision of how society should be structured was socialism, Samajwad. And people were getting attracted to it. Socialists were simply against the private property. They thought it to be the root of all the social ills. Because individual owned the property and they gave employment. But they are only interested in their personal gain, profit. And they are only thinking about themselves, not about the welfare of the people who are the actually producing substance behind it. So if the society could control rather than some individual the property, if the society can control the property, then and some cooperativeness is there, then the attention will be paid to collective social interest. So this was the socialist idea. So how is this going to be? Socialists, they have different visions. If you see that some believes in cooperatives, as I just mentioned, Robert Owen, he was a leading English manufacturer. He sought to build a cooperative community called New Harmony in Indiana, USA. There are others also. Some felt that the cooperatives could not be built on a wide scale, only through individual initiatives. They demanded the governments should encourage these cooperatives. So if you see this in France, for example, Louis Blanc, he wanted the government to encourage cooperatives and replace the capitalist enterprises. So these cooperatives are what? They are the associations of people who produce good together, and when they are sold or consumer get them, the profits they gain are equally shared among the members. Now Karl Marx, his ideas are very important, and Friedrich Engels, they added their ideas also. Karl Marx, he argued that industrial society was capitalist. Capitalists own the factory, they want profit, and the conditions of workers, it could not improve because the profit is actually gained and enjoyed by the private capitalist. So workers need to overthrow this capitalism, and workers should own or rule the private property. So Marx also believed that to free themselves from this capitalist exploitation, workers had to construct a radically socialist party. where property should not belong to a single person or group of individuals, but socially controlled. This would be a communist society. Communist society. So he was convinced that the worker will get through this. So a communist society was the natural society of the future then. So there were support for this socialism. This socialist idea by 1870s, it spread rapidly through Europe. And to coordinate their effort, socialists actually formed an international body. They called them as Second International. So workers in England, Germany, they started forming association just for having a better living and working condition. They also set up funds. In Germany, these associations they worked closely with SPD, that is Social Democratic Party, and also helped them to win elections. By 1905, socialists and trade unionists formed a Labour Party in Britain and Socialist Party in France. But till 1914, socialists never formed the government. But the government were in the hands of conservatives, liberals and radicals. I'll just give you a picture. This is a painting of Paris Commune of 1871. This shows a scene from the popular uprising in Paris between March and May. So this was a period when the town council, that is the Commune of Paris, was taken over by people's government. This consists of workers, ordinary people, professional, political activists. And this uprising emerged against the background of growing discontent against the policy of the French state. But this was ultimately, this Paris Commune was crushed by the government troops, but it was celebrated by the socialists all over the globe. So the Paris Commune is also popularly known for its two important legacies. First is for its association with the workers, red flag, and this red flag, Lal Jhanda, that was the flag adopted by these communards, revolutionary in Paris. Second is the Marseillaise. Originally, we saw that it was a war song written in 1972, but after that, it became the symbol of the commune and the struggle for liberty. So, we just talked about this thing, and this socialism, how it spread, we came to know in Europe. Then, the Russian Revolution. So, every revolution has various events, the chain of events that actually spark this revolution. So in one of the least industrialized of European state, this Russia, the situation was different. Socialists actually took over the government in Russia through the October Revolution in 1917, the fall of monarchy. We'll talk about the Tsar Nicholas II, monarchy in February 1917, and the event of October are normally called as Russian Revolution. So how this has happened? We need to go to some history then. The Russian Empire in 1914. He is Tsar Nicholas II. He ruled in 1914 the Russia and its empire. He has empire not only here, Russia, but Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, parts of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, even Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. So the religion was Russian Orthodox Christianity, which had grown out of the Green Orthodox Church. But the empire contains Catholics, Protestants and Muslims and Buddhists. So I need to tell you about a map that is very important when we go ahead or move forward. These were the central powers: Germany, Austria, Hungary. Now, they were allies, that is the allies or allied power. These are shown in green: Russia, France and United Kingdom. and Serbia. Now they fought the war. These are the countries at war during the First World War. These were the neutral states, Spain, etc., Sweden, Norway. They didn't participate. And there were also some neutral states that later joined the Central Powers, that is, they joined Germany and Austria, Hungary. Then neutral states, these which joined this France and United Kingdom, these neutral, that is in green, this green, Greece and Italy, they joined the other party, that is the allied power, okay, Entente powers. So why did we talk about this map? What was happening? Economy and society of Russia we need to see. We need to understand. See, these are all the unemployed peasants in the pre-war St. Petersburg. Here is the condition, that is the worker sleeping in bunkers in a dormitory, and they slept in shifts. They can't keep their family with them. So, at the beginning of the 20th century, vast majority of Russian people were agriculturists. 85% as against to 40 and 50% in France and Germany. Cultivators produced for the market in this empire. They, for their own needs also, and they export also. And we are talking about Russia. Industries were in few pockets in St. Petersburg and Moscow. Now, the craftsmen also, they undertook much of the production, but the large factories existed alongside these craft workshops also. Many factories were set up in 1980s when Russian railways network was extended and foreign investment came in. At that time, coal production doubled and iron and steel output quadrupled, 4 times it became. And here, if you see in 1900s, there are some areas in Russia where factory workers and craftsmen were almost equal in number. Mostly the industries were in private property. They were private property of industrialists. So industrialists hold most of the property, and the government was supervising these factories for minimum wage and limited hours. But the inspectors could not do their work, and people would work for 15 hours in workshops, and in factories 10 to 12 hours. The accommodation you have seen. And workers were divided into social groups. Some came from village and settled. Some has still linked with village. They come and they leave in the evening. Workers were divided by skill, and metal workers were aristocrats because this work need a lot of training and skill. Women were 31% that in of factory labor force 1914, but they were paid less. So division among these workers were also showed up what they wear, that is dresses and the manners they have. So there was a clear distinction between these groups. And some workers form association to help if somebody is unemployed or there is some financial hardship with some of their members. But because of this, despite of these divisions also, if something happens, they would come together and they would put up the strike. So there were various strikes that took place. In the countryside, the peasant cultivated most of the land, but the bigger people, nobility, crown, and Orthodox Church, they own large properties. Like workers also, the peasants were also divided. There were also these peasants were and the workers were deeply religious. But these peasants, they have no respect for the nobility. If you see in France, the peasants have respect for their nobility, but here it is not there. Sometimes they would murder landlords also. So Russian peasants, this is how they were different from these. What they do is, these Russian peasants, they pooled their land together periodically, and their commune, which was called as mir, they divided according to the need of the individual families. So this is the difference also between the European and Russian peasants. So now the socialism, when it came in Russia, all political parties in Russia were illegal before 1940. So the Russian Social Democratic Worker Party, it was founded in 1898, who were respecting the Marx ideas, Karl Marx idea. But they operate illegally because, means you can say they were just hiding themselves because it was illegal at that time. And they started mobilizing worker and organizing strike. Some Russian socialists, they felt that Russian peasant custom of dividing land periodically made them natural socialist. So they thought that these are the main force. They may be the main force of revolution. So socialists were active along the countryside and they formed Socialist Revolutionary Party in 1900. And they actually struggled for the demand of the peasants and their rights. Lenin felt, we'll talk about Lenin also, he felt that this is the peasants, they could not be the force behind the revolution. Because they were already, you can say there is a differentiation between them, within them. So because there was social grouping between them. So this, there was because the Vladimir Lenin, the parties were there, so the party was divided over the strategy of organization. See, I'll tell you, Vladimir Lenin, who led the Bolshevik, so there is other party which is Menshevik. So Vladimir Lenin thought that it is that in a repressive society like the Tsarist Russia, the party should be disciplined and should control the number of quality of its member, because here the formation of the party was taking place. When the party actually it was just about to be formed, or the ideas were divided, that is one Bolshevik and one these Mensheviks. Menshevik thought that party should be open to all, as in Germany. Let me tell you about this again. Bolshevik and Menshevik, Vladimir Lenin, others, so they want something, they want what? They want that the party members should only be chosen members, and the party should be disciplined and should be controlled. But Menshevik said everyone should come. So there was a turbulent time. In 1905, Russia was, we know that it was an autocracy. But unlike other European rulers, even in the beginning of the 20th century, the Tsar was not subject to any parliament. This was the scenario. So liberals in Russia campaigned to end this state of affairs. And together with the social democrats and social revolutionary, they, along with the peasants, they worked during the revolution of 1905, and they demanded a constitution. They wanted a constitution. So they were supported in the empire by nationalists also, that is, for example, Poland, and also Muslim dominated areas by the Zadidist. The year 1904 was particularly bad for Russian workers. Prices of essential goods rose quickly, and their real wages, what is the real wage? The real wage reflects the quantities of good which the wages will actually buy. And Zadidist, we saw Muslim reformers within the Russian Empire. So at this time, the problem was the wages and the condition, the prices, and the members of this worker association being formed rose dramatically. When 4 members of the Assembly of Russian Workers, which were formed in 1904, was dismissed at the Putilo Iron Works, there was a call for industrial action. Over the next few days, 110,000 workers in St. Petersburg went on strike. They wanted reduction in working hours to 8 hours, increase in the wage, and improvement of working conditions. And when the procession of workers led by Father Gapon reached the Winter Palace, they were attacked by police and Cossacks. 100 workers and killed, died and 300 wounded. And this incident is known as Bloody Sunday, and this Bloody Sunday started a series of events that became known as 1905 revolution. Now strikes were going on and universities were closed. Lawyers, doctors, engineers also, the middle class workers established the Union of Unions, and they also demanded to constitute an assembly. So during the 1905 revolution, Tsar allowed the creation of elected consultative parliament, or it was called as Duma. And this Duma, for a brief while during the revolution, there existed a large number of trade unions and factories, committees made up of factory workers. After 1905, most committees and unions worked unofficially since they were declared illegal, and severe restrictions were there on any political activity. Tsar actually dismissed the first Duma in 75 days and the second in 3 months, because he doesn't want anybody to question his power and authority. He also changed the voting law and packed the third Duma with whom? With politicians, liberals, and the revolutionary. Then the effect of World War and Russian Empire. In 1914, war broke out between European alliances, that is Germany, Austria, and Turkey, that is called as the Central Powers, and then we have the Allied forces, that is France, Britain, and Russia, and later Italy and Romania also joined. Now each country has had a emperor, and they all fought. This was called as the First World War. But in Russia, the war was initially popular and people were rallying for Tsar Nicholas II. But Tsar, as the war progressed, refused to consult the main parties in the Duma, and support was wore thin. Anti-German sentiments were very high because the Russians were fighting against the Germans. Even the name St. Petersburg was changed, because it was a German name, to Petrograd. Then the Tsarina, that is the Tsar's wife, Alexandra's German origins, and poor advisors, especially the monk called Rasputin, it made the autocracy more unpopular among the common masses. Now the First World War, the eastern front of Russia and western front, they differed. In the west front, the Russian army fought from trenches. They strengthened along the eastern flanks, and in the east, they have to move a good deal, and they fought battle with large casualties, and defeats were shocking. Russia armies lost badly in Germany and Austria between 1914 and 1916. 7 million casualties were there in 1917. When they retreated, they destroyed the crops and buildings. Why? Because they want to prevent the enemy from being able to take this land or place. So destruction of crops and building led to over 3 million refugees in Russia. Russian did, and Russian only became refuge. And the situation discredited the government and the Tsar. Soldiers, they don't want to fight of such war. So the war also had severe impact on the industry. Russian owned industry were few in number, and they were cut off because German controlled the Baltic Sea, so they were cut off from the supplies. Industrial equipment also disintegrated more rapidly in Russia. By 1916, railway lines also broke down, and the able-bodied men, means the strong men, they were sent to war. So there was a shortage of labor, which is essential because ultimately the things were shut down, and large supplies of grain has to go to these people because they were fighting the war. So for the people in the cities, bread and flour became scarce, and by the winter of 1916, riots at bread shops were common. Let me show you, this is the Russian soldier during the First World War. And the Imperial Russian Army came to be known as the Russian Steamroller. So it was the largest armed force in the world. When this army shifted its loyalty and began supporting the revolutionaries, the Tsar power collapsed. Then the February Revolution, because we are just taking the events one by one. So there was in the February Revolution in Petrograd, which was previously St. Petersburg. In winter 1917, the conditions in Petrograd capital were grim. The loyalty of the city seemed to emphasize the division among its people. The workers' quarters and factories, they were located in the right bank of river Neva, and see, there were two parts. I'll just show you. There were two parts. First part, that is on the right, there were factories, workers. On the left part, there were fashionable areas, Winter Palace, official building, and the Duma. Duma also met here. In 1917, food shortages were deeply felt in the worker quarters. Winter very cold, frost, heavy snow was there. So parliamentarians wishing to preserve elect government, they were opposed to the Tsar desire to dissolve the Duma. So let me tell you what is happening. There were two parts, right part and left part. Right part, workers and bad conditions. Left parts, fashionable place and good conditions, and Duma was also there. So when there was scarcity here, these people actually went in. That is what we are going to see now. On 22nd February, there was an event. Lockout took place at the factory on the right bank. That is this right bank of the Neva river. Then the next day, worker in 50 factories, they called a strike in order to sympathize this. And this women also led these strikes, and this day is now known as 22nd February, International Women Day. And now demonstrating workers, they crossed from the factory quarters to the center of the capital, that is the Nevsky's Prospect. They crossed this. They came here. At this stage, no political party was involved, so the fashionable quarters and the official buildings were surrounded by workers. So government imposed curfew. Demonstrators at that time, they just dispersed, but they came back on 24th and 25th. Now the government called out the cavalry and police. On Sunday 25th February, the government suspended the Duma. Politicians spoke out against this measure. Demonstrators, they returned in force on the street on 26th February. Now on 27th, the police headquarters were ransacked and the streets thronged with people raising slogans about their bread, wages and better hours and democracy. The government tried to control the situation. They asked the cavalry and the police to fire against the demonstrator. But the cavalry and the police people, they denied. Ultimately, they joined those who were demonstrating. This was a sudden change. So the striking workers gathered to form Soviets and councils in the same building where the Duma used to meet. This was the Petrograd Soviet. The next day, the delegation went to see Tsar. Military commanders advised him to just abdicate. He followed the advice and abdicated on 2nd March. That is, he left, simply saying. Soviet leaders and Duma leaders, they formed a provisional government, interim government to run the country. Russia's future would be decided by the Constituent Assembly, elected on the basis of universal adult suffrage, that is, everyone has to be given the right to vote. Petrograd had led the February Revolution that brought down the monarchy in February 1917. What happened after February? The army officials, landowners and industrialists, they were influential in the provincial government which was made here. See. But the liberals as well as the socialists, they were among them worked towards the elected government. They wanted the elected government. So restriction on the public meetings and associations were removed. And Soviet, like the Petrograd Soviet, they were found everywhere now. In April 1917, Bolshevik leader, because of this scenario, Vladimir Lenin, who was on exile, he returned to Russia. He and the Bolsheviks, that is the supporters, had opposed the wars in 1914. So now he felt that this is the time to take power. So he declared the war, that the war needs to be brought to a close. Land needs to be transferred to peasants and bank needs to be nationalized. So these were his three demands, Lenin's three demands. This is called April Theses. So what were his demands? Will come again. First, close the war, land to be transferred to peasants and banks to be nationalized. So he changed the Bolshevik party name to Communist Party, that is in order to indicate new radical aims. And most other in the Bolshevik party, they were initially surprised. Now they think that this is not the right time to actually do this revolution. Okay, so the provisional government needed to be supported because there is a government being formed. But the things change. He is the famous Lenin, Vladimir Lenin. This is a Bolshevik image. Now through the summer, the worker movement spread. In industrial area, factory committees were formed and they started questioning the industrialists, how they ran the factories. Trade unions grew in number and socialist committee were formed in the army. So in June, about 500 Soviets sent representative to an all-Russian Congress of Soviets. But as the provisional government, it saw that their power is reducing and the Bolsheviks are increasing. Their power is increasing, Bolsheviks. They took stern action. It resisted attempt by workers to run factories and began arresting the leaders. And Bolsheviks were, sternly repressed. And most Bolsheviks, they either had to hide or flee. And meanwhile, what was happening in the countryside, peasants and the socialist revolutionary leaders, they pressed for a redistribution of land and land committees were formed. Encouraged by these socialist revolutionaries, peasants seized land between July and September 1917. So here is a picture that these are the July days. A pro-Bolshevik, these are Bolshevik supporters, and these were fired upon by the army. And the Russian Revolution. So we talked about what happened in Russia, what were the events or series of events which took place. So there are some certain important dates that we need to discuss before we talk about the revolution of October 1917. So here some important dates are like this. 1850s to 1880s, there were debates over socialism in Russia. It was not all socialism. There were discussions only. Then in 1898, there was a formation of Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party. In 1905, the Bloody Sunday and the Revolution of 1905. In 1917, 2nd March, that is the abdication of the Tsar. And on 24th October, Bolshevik uprising in Petrograd. We have talked about this up till here, but we will be seeing this in a short while, that from 1918 to 20, it was the Civil War. Civil War is the war which is fought between the parties or the organization or the people inside a country. That is civil war. A normal war is what? When it is fought between two countries or between multiple countries. But civil war is inside the country. People are fighting, maybe various reasons are there. Then in 1990, it was formation of the Comintern. This intern is for international, com is for this communism. Then 1929, it was beginning of collectivization. So we talked about all this, and we'll see all this in our discussion. So the revolution of October 1917. So we saw that the provisional government was being formed, and in between Lenin, he was on exile, he came back. So there was a conflict between this provisional government and the Lenin, that is the Bolsheviks. The Lenin feared the provisional government would set up a dictatorship. This is what Lenin feared. So he started a discussion for an uprising against the government. And Bolshevik supporters in the army, Soviet and factories, they were brought together. On 16 October 1917, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and Bolshevik party in order to agree to socialist seizure of power. So a military revolution committee, a proper committee, military, which consists of military revolutionary committee was appointed, but the date was not being disclosed. It was kept secret. And the leader was Leon Trotsky. We talked about him earlier also. Now the uprising began on 24th October. Prime Minister, he was sensing at that time of the provisional government, he was sensing trouble. He was Kerensky. So he left the city in order to summon the troops. What happened in dawn? Military men loyal to the government, they seized the building of two Bolshevik newspapers, and pro-government troops were sent to take over these telephone and telegraph offices and protect the Winter Palace. But as we saw that this military revolutionary committee was already there, so in a response, a swift response, this military revolution committee ordered its supporter to arrest the minister and seize the government offices. So later in that day only, same day, there was a ship called Aurora. Aurora shelled the Winter Palace. And other vessels also sailed down this Neva River and took over various military points. And the same day, by the nightfall, the city was under the control of this committee, Military Revolution Committee. And minister finally surrendered. So at a meeting of all Russian Congress of Soviets in Petrograd, a majority approved the Bolshevik action. They said the action was correct. So this was an uprising. And there was a heavy fighting, especially in Moscow. But by December, the Bolshevik controlled the Moscow-Petrograd area. Here is a picture. If you see that we have Lenin here on the left and Trotsky on the right with the workers at Petrograd. So what actually changed after October? Because the Bolshevik are now in control. The Bolshevik was totally opposed to private property. So most of the industry and banks which were in private hands, they were nationalized in November 1917. That is, the government has the ownership and management. And land was declared social property, and they allowed the peasant to seize the land of the nobility. What happened in the city? The Bolsheviks enforced the partition of large houses so that the other people can also stay there. They banned all the old titles of aristocracy. And in order to assert the change, new uniforms were designed, especially for the army and officials. And it was properly done, proper competition were organized in 1918. And this, you see, this is the result of this cap or this hat is the result of one such competition. This is Budyonokva. Okay, so this is very tough name to spell, Budyonokva. This is the hat which is very famous, the Soviet hat. Now the Bolshevik party, it was renamed as Russian Communist Party, and in November 17, the Bolshevik, they conducted the election to the Constituent Assembly. They failed. Then in January 1918, Assembly rejected Bolshevik measures and Lenin dismissed. In return, Lenin dismissed the whole assembly. He was of that thought that all the Russian Congress of Soviets was more democratic than the assembly elected in uncertain condition. So in March 1918, though there was opposition from the political allies, Bolshevik made peace with Germany at Brest, Litovsk. And after that, the Bolshevik became the only party to participate in the election to the All Russian Congress of Soviets, which ultimately became the parliament of the country. So Russia now became one party state. Trade unions were under control. There was secret police, this Cheka, and later it was named as OGPU, NKVD. So they punished all those who criticized the Bolsheviks. So this all happened at that time. This is a picture of May Day demonstration in Moscow in 1918. Then the time came for the civil war. When the Bolshevik, because they were opposed for the land owning by nobility, they ordered land redistribution. Now the Russian army, mostly consisting of peasants, the soldiers, they wanted to go home because they wanted that land. Otherwise, they will not get the land. Non-Bolshevik socialists, liberal and supporters of autocracy, they also condemned the Bolshevik uprising, which was taking place, which has already took place. So their leaders moved to South Asia, and organized troops to fight the Bolsheviks. That is, you understand, Bolshevik, when they came into, say, a power, the other people or other thoughts like socialist, liberal and supporter of autocracy, they moved to South Russia and organized troops to fight the Bolsheviks. And these Bolsheviks were known as Reds. So during 1918 and 1919, the Greens, that is the Soviet revolutionaries, and the White, that is the pro-Tsar, they controlled most of the Russian Empire. And they were backed by foreign parties like French, American, British, Japanese troops. So all those forces who were worried at the growth of socialism in Russia, they were interested in this party. So now there was a war, and who were fighting? The Bolsheviks, and there was the other party, which were Greens, that is the social revolutionaries, and there were Whites, which are pro-Tsarist. So these three were in a civil war. Now supporters of this private property among these Whites, that is the pro-Tsarist, they took very hard step with peasants who had seized land. And these actions led to the loss of popular support of non-Bolsheviks. By January 1920, the Bolsheviks, after all these civil war, they controlled most of the former Russian Empire. So they succeeded because, they need to have certain allies also, or cooperation also. So with non-Russian nationalities and Muslim Zadidist. So this is how they got back on most of the regime they took. But in Khiva, in Central Asia, Bolshevik colonists brutally massacred local nationalists in the name of defending this socialism. So now many were confused that what exactly Bolshevik government want, or what Bolshevik means. So what was the remedy? Most non-Russian nationalities were given political autonomy in the Soviet Union, that is USSR, the state the Bolshevik created from the Russian Empire in December 1922. But since this was a combined, with some unpopular popular policies that the Bolshevik forced the local government to follow, like the harsh discouragement of the nomadism. Nomadism means going here and there for the search of livelihood, job. Attempt to win over different nationalities, they were just partly successful. They were not entirely successful. So these are certain sources from which we know what we are talking about, that these things happened actually. So autonomy is the right to govern themselves. This is what we talk here. And the nomadism, as I said, the lifestyle of those who do not live in one place but move from area to area to earn their livelihood. So after that, there was making of socialist society. Because the civil war was there, the Bolshevik kept industries and banks nationalized. They permitted the peasant to cultivate their land that had been socialized, and Bolshevik used confiscated land in order to demonstrate that what collective work is. So the process of centralized planning was introduced at that time. Officials actually assessed the economy, they set targets for 5-year period, 5-year plan, And on these, the government fixed oil prices in order to promote industrial growth during the first two 5-year plans from 27 to 32, like 1927 to 1932 and 1933 to 1938. So now there was a growth because there was a centralized planning. Economic growth was there. Industrial production increased from 1929 to 1933 by 100% in case of oil, coal and steel, and new factories, cities they came into being. But the rapid construction was there and there was a poor working condition. If you see the city of Magnitogorsk, the construction of steel plant was done in 3 years, but this plant stopped for 550 times. In living quarters, in the winter time, 40 degree below, that is minus 40 degree was there. People have to, toilet in open, and you can see, understand that minus 40, even in minus 15, if you breathe, there is ice in your nose. Minus 40, you can understand. So the situation was not good. The extended schooling system was developed and proper arrangement were made for the factory workers and peasants in order to allow them to enter the universities. Creches for working women, cheap public health also was provided. Model living quarters for workers were also there. Here is an example. This is a factory came to be seen as a symbol of socialism. And this poster is saying in this Russian that the smoke from this chimney is the breath of Soviet Russia. Then the children at school and the child in the Magnitogorsk during the 5-year plan, and here factory worker will have lunch. This is their, you can say, the canteen. Now after Lenin, who? Stalin. So what happened there? Stalinism and collectivization. So this is a poster during collectivization. It is stating that we shall strike at the kulak. We'll talk about kulak, working for the decrease in cultivation. So the period of early planned economy, it was linked to disasters of the collectivization of agriculture. Collectivization means the lands are small, so they need to be collected, and then it needs to be collected as a whole by the society. So by 1927 to 1928, the towns in the Soviet Russia were facing acute problem of grain supplies. Though government fixed the prices at what amount it should be sold, but the peasant refused because the price were less. So Stalin, who came after Lenin, who headed the party, he introduced certain emergency measures because the shortage of grain was there. He believed that these rich peasants and traders, they are holding the stock, munafa khori. So for that, the speculation has to be stopped and supplies should be confiscated. This is what they are doing. So in 1928, the party members, they went to grain producing areas, they supervised or the enforced grain collection and raiding the kulaks. And these kulaks are the, you can say, rich peasants. There are two words coming, that is deported and exiled. Deported means forcibly removing from one's own country, and exiled means forcing to live away from one's own country. So now because the kulaks, because well-to-do farmers were there, but the shortage still continued. So the decision was taken finally for the collectivization, that is the collective farm. And it was argued that because of the small size of the land or the holdings, the grain could not be grown the way it should be grown. So after 1970, the land had been given over to peasants. Small size it was. So in order to develop modern farms, they need large farms, and they need to eliminate kulaks also. So the land was taken from the peasants and the kulaks, and finally there was a state controlled large farm idea was there. So after this collectivization program of Stalin, from 1929, the partly forced all his party forced all peasants to cultivate the collective farming, that is, cultivate in collective farms. Okay, it was called as kolkhoz, and many things were done. The authorities also worked for it, but the peasants which worked on this land, and there were enraged peasants also, they resisted the authority, and what they did, they destroyed their livestock, because everyone would not want to do this. So between 1929 to 1931, the livestock, that is the cattle, fell by 1/3. That is, if they were 100, it became only 30. So those who resisted were either deported or exiled, and as they resisted this collectivization, peasants argued that they are neither rich, they are not even against socialism. So why are they are subjected to deporting and exile? But Stalin government allowed certain independent cultivation, but the government didn't support it. So in spite of this collectivization also, this was the second step. First step we saw here, that is the first step the Stalin took, and second step also he took, that is the collectivization. And then even after doing this, the production did not increase after taking these two steps. In fact, the bad harvest of 1930 to 1933, it led to most devastating famines in Soviet history. Over 4 million died. Here you see a picture of peasant women being gathered to work in large collective farms. So many within the party also criticize the confusion in industrial production under the planned economy and the consequence which took place after collectivization. And what would happen to these people? They were charged with conspiracy, and accusations were made throughout the country. And by 1939, 2 million were in prison and labor camps. Those who talked against them. Most were innocent of the crime, but no one spoke for them. And false confessions they were forced to make the false confessions. Ultimately, they were executed. So what was the global influence of Russian Revolution and the USSR? This existing socialist parties in Europe, they did not approve fully the Bolshevik took power and kept it for a while. But the possibility of workers' state fired people's imagination across the world. Various countries, the communism or communist parties were formed, like Communist Party of Great Britain. And also the Bolshevik encouraged the colonies they have to do this experiment. And many non-Russians from outside the USSR, they participated in the Conference of Peoples of East, that is in 1920, and the Bolshevik founded the Comintern, that is the International Union of Pro-Bolshevik Socialist Parties. So some also got education, and by the time of outbreak of Second World War, the USSR had given socialism a global face and world stature. So it was USSR from where the socialism has come out and spread all over. And after this also, by 1950s, it was acknowledged within the city that the style of government in USSR was not very much keeping with the ideals of Russian Revolution. In the world socialist movement, it was recognized that all was not well inside Soviet Union. But a backward country has become a superpower. It was a great power. Industries, agriculture has developed, poor are being fed, and the essential freedom of citizens were denied. But you see, it was growing. So by the end of 20th century, the international reputation of USSR as a socialist country declined. But in each country the ideas of socialism were rethought in a variety of different ways. So this is the picture of special issues on Lenin of the Indo-Soviet Journal, and because the idea of socialism spread because of this revolution which took place. And these are certain, sources from which we know an Indian arrives in Soviet Russia in 1920, what he has to say. And Rabindranath Tagore also wrote from Russia in 1930. So this is how we get a clear picture of what was happening there. So this is all about the socialism in Europe and French Revolution. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.